Welcome to part 12 of the CipherVibe Cloud Security Capabilities series. This episode explains security graph and attack paths, why it matters, how the capability works, which mistakes weaken it, and how to build it in a measurable way. A security graph represents entities and relationships so defenders can understand how separate weaknesses combine into an attack path. The graph should make prioritization explainable by showing the starting point, traversal conditions, target, evidence, and actions that break the path. The key idea is that a security capability is more than a product feature or a collection of alerts. It combines people, process, technology, decision rights, evidence, and continuous improvement. We will examine its architecture, operating workflow, failure modes, defensive controls, implementation roadmap, and useful metrics. Coverage is not the same as effectiveness. A dashboard can show thousands of checks while the capability still fails because evidence is stale, ownership is missing, or remediation is never verified. The business outcome should be explicit. Teams need to know which loss scenarios the capability reduces, which systems are in scope, and which remaining risks require a conscious decision. To understand security graph and attack paths, start with its architecture and vocabulary. The capability should create a traceable chain from source evidence to a security decision and then to an accountable action. First, nodes represent assets, identities, applications, data stores, findings, controls, accounts, and business services. Second, edges represent trust, reachability, membership, permission, deployment, containment, data access, communication, and ownership. Third, attack path analysis searches for feasible sequences from exposed or compromised starting points to high-value objectives. Fourth, graph quality depends on identity resolution, timestamps, provenance, direction, conditional access, and confidence. These concepts need shared identity, timestamps, provenance, ownership, and access control. Every summarized risk should link back to its source evidence and disclose missing information. A sound architecture separates collection, normalization, analysis, policy, workflow, and presentation. Teams can then test freshness, identity resolution, policy results, owner routing, and closure independently. Design for degraded conditions. Providers impose rate limits, schemas change, credentials expire, and events arrive late. A professional capability reports uncertainty and health instead of presenting incomplete information as fact. Trust boundaries deserve equal attention. Identify where data crosses accounts, tenants, regions, vendors, privilege levels, and administrative domains, then apply authentication, authorization, validation, encryption, and audit controls at those boundaries. A useful operating model for security graph and attack paths follows a repeatable evidence lifecycle. First, define crown jewel targets and realistic attacker starting points before computing paths. Second, ingest authoritative relationships and reconcile duplicate assets and identities across sources. Third, apply traversal rules that reflect actual network, identity, vulnerability, and control conditions. Fourth, rank paths by feasibility, active exploitation, privilege, data impact, business importance, and confidence. Fifth, choose remediation that removes a high-leverage edge, then recompute to verify the path is broken. The workflow does not end when a ticket closes or an API returns success. Security closure requires fresh evidence showing that the risky condition is gone and does not immediately recur. Ownership should be established before urgent findings arrive using service catalogs, business applications, on-call schedules, and escalation paths. Prioritization should explain the influence of exploitation, reachability, privilege, data, business criticality, compensating controls, and confidence. Repeated findings should drive changes to secure templates, defaults, libraries, identity patterns, and architecture standards. Define escalation points for missing owners, disputed priority, failed changes, and evidence that suggests active compromise. Those conditions should move into incident or risk governance rather than remaining indefinitely in a routine queue. The fastest way to evaluate security graph and attack paths is to study how the capability can fail. First, a visually impressive graph can be misleading when its relationships are stale or inferred without confidence. Second, unlimited traversal produces theoretical paths that attackers cannot actually execute. Third, duplicate identities and resources create false shortcuts or hide real relationships. Fourth, scoring without an explanation prevents owners from understanding why their issue matters. Fifth, breaking one path may leave several equivalent routes to the same target. These failures share a pattern. A local measure looks successful while the full outcome is weak. A connector, scanner, or repair can report success while coverage, exploitability, or recurrence remains unresolved. Measure whether the program improves important coverage, shortens exposure time, removes attack paths, and prevents recurrence, not how many alerts it produces. Exceptions need a reason, owner, compensating controls, approval, and expiry. Automation should reflect confidence, reversibility, blast radius, and business impact. Test both through controlled failure exercises. Correlate weaknesses instead of reviewing them separately. A moderate configuration issue, broad identity grant, exposed service, and sensitive data store may combine into a severe path even when no individual alert looks critical. A dependable security graph and attack paths program uses defense in depth. No single scanner, policy, gateway, or agent should be expected to carry the entire outcome. First, track edge provenance, freshness, direction, conditions, confidence, and authoritative source. Second, validate path logic with cloud architects, penetration tests, incident evidence, and controlled simulations. Third, expose every traversal step and the specific evidence supporting it. Fourth, model compensating controls and required attacker capabilities instead of treating every edge as equally usable. Fifth, recompute after changes and measure how many consequential paths and high-leverage relationships remain. Control design should include preventive, detective, responsive, and recovery layers. Together they establish safe defaults, identify drift, govern containment, and restore service. Least privilege applies to connectors, agents, orchestration identities, data stores, and administrators. Scope, separate, monitor, rotate, and test their access. Every control needs an owner and test strategy. Validate it with representative assets, negative cases, simulated attacks, provider failures, and rollback exercises. Integrate controls with engineering through clear pull requests, owner routing, reusable fixes, documented standards, and fast feedback. Preserve an evidence trail from detection through decision, approval, change, and verification. That lineage supports investigations, audits, lessons learned, and fair performance measurement without forcing teams to reconstruct history from separate systems. A practical implementation roadmap for security graph and attack paths should build trust before scale. First, start with one cloud environment, privileged identities, internet exposure, and a small set of crown jewels. Second, validate identity and network relationships before adding every scanner finding. Third, introduce vulnerability, data, runtime, and business context in measured stages. Fourth, connect path-breaking actions to ownership and remediation workflows. Fifth, use the graph for incident scoping and architecture review as well as preventive prioritization. The roadmap is incremental because a focused production scope lets teams validate evidence, ownership, workflow, and control safety before scaling. Useful measures include authoritative edge freshness, crown jewel path count, high-leverage edge age, path verification rate, and risk reduction per remediation. Give every metric a precise definition, data source, owner, and known limitation. Pair lagging indicators such as exposure age with leading indicators such as coverage, control health, exception expiry, and secure template adoption. Maturity means the organization can discover important risk, explain it, assign it, act safely, verify the result, and learn from recurrence. Review the roadmap quarterly. Changes in architecture, threat activity, Regulation, business strategy, and provider services can alter both priorities and assumptions. Retire metrics and controls that no longer guide useful decisions. For more cybersecurity market intelligence, research, and educational briefings, visit CipherVibe.com. CipherVibe is operated by Cloudsectech LLC. This video is general education, not legal, compliance, financial, or incident response advice. Never access or test systems without explicit written authorization.